Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome everyone, especially this afternoon's speaker, to the Mariner Minor Cook Athenaeum. Our speaker this afternoon is the 2011 Kravis Prize winner. The Kravis Prize recognizes outstanding nonprofits that promote social change. Our speaker also happens to be the co-author and founder of Escuela Nueva. She is also the the Vice Minister of Education in Colombia, the former educational advisor of Latin America, and finally, the founder and director of her NGO. So it is without further ado that I would like to invite Ms. Vicky Colbert.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here with such a wonderful crowd of future leaders and of a school of leadership. So it's really extraordinary to have this chance to be with you. This has been a life project for almost 30 years. I didn't want to say that number sometimes, but I'm not afraid anymore. It's been a life project, but not only my life project, but a project of all my colleagues, communities, parents, children that have accompanied me in this long journey for so many years. The most important thing is that I will be sharing with you in a moment is that it is possible. Yes, you can transform and you can introduce quality education in low-income public schools. Of course, it's easier with the private schools, but it is possible also to work with the low-income public schools and have results. So I'm going to be sharing with you, I'm going to go a little bit fast, I talk a little bit fast, but I would like especially to leave time for questions at the end. So the first thing is, yes, it is possible, and I've been sticking to this from all my professional spheres. Okay, just a little bit of Latin America and what is Escuela Nueva. I'll skip this because you know that the highest social return is investing in basic education, and I'm originally a sociologist, and without quality education, I know there's no social change, no economic change, nor peace and development. So this is the first premise, and we know all of this. I'll skip that. 4 years of quality basic education increases rural productivity, reduction in birth rates, improves health and nutrition of children, and especially attitudinal changes towards development and change. Basic education in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have progressed a lot in access, but we still have high levels of failure and incomplete education, highest dropout and repetition rates, and especially in the remote rural areas and indigenous populations. Latin America is a continent of a lot of inequity, and it was precisely the inequity. When I came back from doing my graduate work in Stanford in sociology of education and in education, I decided to work with the poorest of the poor schools, the most invisible schools in Colombia. Just a couple of numbers. 50% of students in 4th grade do not understand what they read. So how do we want to have competitiveness? How do we want to have participation in the labor force? How do we want to have peace and development if people do not understand what they read? So, just these communication skills are key. And they're just millions dropped. You spend so much money in education with no results. I always say education systems are like failed companies. Nothing works, no results, low teacher morale, all the problems, name it. So I think it's one of the systems that changes have taken the slowest in comparison to other systems of society. So change in education is not happening the same as other changes in society. Consequences of high repetition and late entry, it's one word, heterogeneity. I don't know how to say it right in English. It's handling, how do you handle diversity, especially when traditional methods are used? This is one of the key challenges. So especially when there's late entry into the system and high repetition, then you find in low-income schools, children that are older, others younger, you find them all in the same classroom. So this is one of the situations and the consequences. I want to inspire you with this. I think this is an inspirational quote. For more than 100 years, the lack of school management methods has been the cause of countless complaints. But it has been only in the last 30 years that efforts have been made to find a solution to this problem. And what has resulted? Schools continue exactly the same as before. Who said this? Comenius in the year 1600. Okay? So I wanted to point out to this simply because everything has changed except the classroom. And I usually say if a doctor from 100 years ago is brought into a hospital of today, he would probably feel lost thinking that he's in another world. This is in the health sector. If a teacher from 100 years ago is brought into a traditional classroom today, he would probably feel at home. So it's just a message, you know? It's just that it helps us to reflect that everything has changed except the classroom. And more of the same is not enough. Just expanding current education systems, like the way they are set up at the moment, is not, it can't be done. So we had to sort of rethink everything. And the beauty was we didn't have any money. So I think this is crucial because then that forces you to get down to the essentials. Okay, there have been improvements in the field of education. Basic education is included in the Millennium Development Goals. The UNESCO Global Monitoring Report, we've improved, but it's still enrollment and quality has been partial and mixed. And the issue right now, the challenge in all countries, either in Latin America, Asia, Africa, US, wherever, is quality. This is when I started working, when I came back from my graduate studies, this is what I found in the rural remote schools of Colombia. Traditional, and this, by the way, is Latin America, but I think it's very similar to the other continents. Traditional frontal memoristic teacher-centered methods, where a teacher speaks all the time and gives instruction, overloaded irrelevant curriculum, rigid calendars, evaluation and promotion systems that expel children from the school, insufficient time for effective learning, 3 hours a day, 100-day school year versus 6 hours a day, 220 days, let's say in European countries. Very weak school-community relationship. Nothing of what the child learns can be applied to their parents and their community. Low self-esteem of children, low teacher morale, ineffective, inadequate pre-service and in-service training of teacher. A lot of money goes into teacher training with no results. Sometimes there's a negative correlation. The more training, the less results in the classroom. Lack of quality learning materials. So the results are low student learning achievements and incomplete schooling and dropout rates. As I said, a failed company. So, UNESCO has been saying these things, all the multilateral organizations, that new learning paradigms are needed, that improving the quality of education implies more than an emphasis on expanding current systems of education. I'm quoting Joe Farrell, Professor Emeritus of the Institute of Education of Toronto. More of the same is not enough. This is a little bit sort of sophisticated the way us Latinos say it. I don't know if it means the same in English. It implies a cultural change, a shift of emphasis from transmission of information to an emphasis in comprehension and collective construction of knowledge. This means people working more together in cooperative learning approaches. In the States, you have this, but this is not the case in France, in many European countries, or in developing countries. A new type of school, renovated teaching methods, and a change in the role of the teacher. We really had to rethink the whole thing. And I'm quoting here an ex-director of UNESCO for Latin America, ex-minister of education of Chile, ex-professor in Hiroshima. Only a profound change in basic education founded on a new type of school and renovated teaching methods will make it possible to achieve the quality needed for the 21st century, and to respond to the requirements posed by democratic processes, social and economic development. He published many years ago, In Search of the School of the 21st Century, is the Colombian Escuela Nueva the Right Pathfinder. He wrote it many years ago, and I think it's still, it's perfect for the situation at the moment. So all the world conferences, Jomtien, Thailand, Dakar, there's been so much. But then they say at the end, let's just look for the modest and realistic objectives, at least the basic learning needs. That children acquire reading comprehension skills, that they can communicate orally and in writing, they can solve simple mathematical operations, that they can learn from their surroundings, that they can solve daily problem lives, and very important, practice democratic behaviors. This is key. But we started tackling these things, and we ended up with cutting-edge pedagogics, what computers cannot do, which is learning to learn, learning to lead processes, learning how to synthesize information, how to work in teams. This is the most important thing, cooperative learning. Critical thinking, criticize and accept criticism and not use force, test knowledge, and of course now the use of ICTs, and to take risks. These are what we, let's say in the education sector, we call the meta competencies, which are essential for the 21st century skills. And this is what these education systems are not promoting. So where did we start? We started with the rural remote schools, what are called multi-grade schools, the little red cows in the prairie, you know, where there's one teacher or two in low-density populations, and these schools exist, one or two teachers work simultaneously, and they exist in both developed and developing countries. This is where we started, and this is the beauty, because precisely these are the bigger challenges. How do you handle different learning rhythms in the classroom? How do you handle diversity in the classroom? So it forces you into small group learning, into developing flexible strategies and personalized. We had to develop special material, reusable, and of course quality teacher training was the essential at the core of this, and multi-grade schools are not a class option. This is the origins, this is where we started. Of course we started in the remote rural, but we also got into urban, and I'll share with you that later on. But the most important thing is that these schools force you to innovate. I just want to quote Angela Little from the University of London. Her book is called Education for All and Multi-Grade Teaching Challenges and Opportunities. I've been working very close with her because the challenging thing is that these schools are invisible to educational planners worldwide. Everybody assumes everybody learns in a monograde setting, a teacher per classroom. And these are the schools in sub-Saharan Africa, these are in many, many, many of the countries worldwide, in China, but they're sort of invisible, okay? But this forced us to innovate, so this was our starting point. So what is Escuela Nueva? It's a little school in the coffee region of Colombia. It's a basic in the education innovation that we started in Colombia. This is very important. All those problems I mentioned, we tried to address them systemically, all together, instead of tackling each one in isolation. We had to think systemically of large-scale reforms as the beginning. So it integrated curriculum, teacher training, and follow-up, community, administrative strategies in a systemic and cost-effective. We had to think of costs. We started as a local innovation. It gradually became a national policy in Colombia, reaching 20,000 schools. This was the toughest part, trying to build this in through the government bureaucracy. Let's leave it for the questions. We started with the government, but at the end I had to create an NGO. I had to create an institution to sustain these issues. So my process was the other way around. First you have to scale up, and then you have to scale down. Okay, so what does it do? Rethink education, and nothing, when you look at these things, the audience here, you're familiarized with this. I mean, this is not new in principle. This is the philosophy of education that we've known 100 years ago, the theory. We know it, but it's making it in operation applicable, scalable, replicable, and affordable. But when you see these things, you say, my God, this is the way we study here in the States. Yes, but many of you that have gone to good quality schooling. But this is not the case of low-income public schools in the developing world, okay? So we were formed to transform the conventional school. What does it promote? Nothing new. Maria Montessori, John Dewey, they talked about this 80 years ago. Child-centered, active, participatory, cooperative learning, self-paced learning. Not everybody learns the same thing at the same time, okay? Children learn through dialogue and interaction. Flexibility, different way, we modularized everything. Modularization takes place in the universities. Why not in basic education? Children learn in different learning rhythms. This is the way a class looks in Escuela Nueva. Some are working on something, others are working on others. Relevance, if there's no relevance, you do not learn. A new role of the teacher as a manager, a facilitator. The teacher doesn't have to spend so much time transmitting information. Information comes right now packed in different ways. So the role of the teacher for the 21st century has to be a different role. A manager, somebody that empowers, that promotes, that facilitates. So we had to change the way of doing our teacher training to compensate for what the faculties of education and teachers' colleges were not doing. So teachers had to go through the same experiential learning they would be using with their children. Because we in Latin America have conferences on participatory learning. so much money spent in that. That anything the child learned would be applied with their parents, with their family and their community. Very simple. Not so many PTAs, because low-income people, that they can't take out so much time for so many meetings. So we had to think, how are we going to promote more dialogue and interaction of the child, of what he's learning every day with their parents without having so many meetings? Interaction between teachers, parents, and children. This is key. I'm so happy to be here in the leadership, famous College of Leadership here, because this is exactly what we try to do with the children in schools. Promote leadership skills. Parents involved in the learning process. Democratic attitudes and participation. This is John Dewey. You learn democracy, learning how to participate in school. If you don't have a participatory method, how can you learn democracy? How can you learn to elect someone? How can you learn to have commitments? So we have committees, and children have their own committees, and they organize their work, and they learn to vote and to be elected. So this is key. School government elections. I have such wonderful videos of little girls, just taking the leadership in the schools. We're actually making very silent cultural revolutions. Happy, healthy, confident students. And we have our little tricks. A new generation of self-paced, self-directed, reusable, because we didn't have any money. So they're dialoguing textbooks. Children learn to dialogue and interact among themselves, looking at their eyes, not looking at their necks, sitting one behind the other one. Learning guides that promote individual work, group work, promoting interaction, dialogue. Little learning corners, like Maria Montessori said, with low-cost materials from the community, but where you bring alive the local identity of the communities and strengthen their cultural identity. Classroom libraries that promote discovery, $100 classroom library close to the children. Very simple instruments, like community maps that bring the school and the community together. Every instrument in Escuela Nueva promotes participation. Attendance records where children themselves control their attendance. It's not a teacher spending half an hour reading the list. It's just promoting self-governance and empowering children to take responsibility. It suggests everything is so simple, and it can be done. This is why you have to transform the daily routines. So Escuela Nueva generates a new culture of peace and citizenship, allowing boys and girls to learn, participate. So it impacts the whole system. Children, improved academic skills, self-esteem, social skills, and democratic behavior. Teachers, improved teaching practices, positive attitude, and peer support leadership. We're creating a learning network of teachers among themselves. This is so important. A community of practice, families and communities involved, and of course education administrators, they have to be less rigid and controlling. So we plan to impact national training policies, curriculum policies, and textbook policies. So the summary, it's one of the longest bottom-up. We had to start bottom-up. Innovations that has been sustained despite innovations fading bureaucracies. Children are at the center of the learning process. Learning is self-paced, flexible, cooperative, and participatory. We address all these key education factors together and try to change the whole system. And the methodology is simple, cost-effective, and efficient. And the results are manifold in academic, learning skills, democratic behavior. Let me just give you a little bit of data. This is the first study that UNESCO did in 1999. Colombia was about around the middle in Latin America. But we were the only country where rural schools performed better than the urban schools, except to the mega cities. So this is extremely important because that rural schools get better results than urban schools. This is very unique. So this was mainly because of the rollout of Escuela Nueva in the rural part of Colombia. In math, only Cuban scores were above Colombian. Of course, in Cuba you have a small island, you have long-term policies, you can have results, teachers cannot strike. So, there are many other variables. There are not many other variables. It's true. I mean, when you're trying to change the system, you have to think of many, many variables. I was sharing in my table that when we designed this from the outset, we had to think of it that it would be politically feasible. We have to work with unions. Technically feasible, that any teacher can do it, and not a PhD graduate from Harvard. Any teacher can do it. And financially feasible. So technically, politically, and financially. We had to design that from the outset. So it is possible. We challenged massively the traditional teacher-centered frontal method model, teachers speaking all the time, and promoted what we know 100 years ago, active child-centered participatory and cooperative learning. This is what we did. And this is not new. This is what you find in your elite schools, and also in the elite schools in Latin America, but this never came to the low-income public schools. So we were forced to innovate in pedagogical practices, in evaluation procedures, in textbook policies, teacher training policies, and we actually inspired the new law of education in Colombia. This, for me, is the most important part because it touches peaceful democratic behavior. It demonstrated that cooperative learning can initiate positive changes in democratic behavior. Skill, values, and attitudes for peaceful social interaction can be developed at the school. John Dewey said this so many years ago. This is a Colombian teacher. I have some good videos that in another occasion where you see the changes and the leadership skills, especially of girls. Pedagogical routines that are oriented to group work, participation, self-learning have a better chance of forming a democratic ethos than those that are merely directive. This is a result from Academy of Education in Guatemala with indigenous children. The Escuelas Nuevas are the yellow. Children learn to take turns, to lead processes, to give positive feedback. They learn to take turns, and this is in an indigenous community in Guatemala. They learn to give positive feedback instead of negative feedback. It's the opposite. They lead processes. This is so important for leadership skills. So this study, we did it, and this was published by the University of London in 2006, how the school does influence the development of democratic behavior and peaceful social interaction skills. There's a direct impact of the school system on the practices of the families. Children become agents of change in their family and introduce more horizontal relationships. Escuela Nueva demonstrated significant results in the formation of democratic behavior and peaceful social interaction in comparison with conventional schools. The school's impact goes beyond the general violent environment. We took some of the municipalities where there was the biggest violence in Colombia. And this is so important because, especially coming out of Colombia, we're exporting a model that promotes peace and development. The girls' participation. It's simply, we change the way we learn, and immediately we know that cooperative learning contributes to eliminate prejudice, stereotypes, and gender biases. So we have many evaluations showing the improvement of girls and boys in the development of academic and citizen schools. These studies were done in Nicaragua and Guatemala, a little bit in the Philippines, where we started many years ago. So immediately the enrollment, the participation, the achievement, the completion was higher among girls. So we also adapted this to urban Colombia, not as pretending that it become a national policy, but also to show that it's good quality learning. So we did it to urban marginal settings because Colombia became urbanized. This is just to show that we took the worst 20 schools of the 100 worst to Bogota, and in less than 2 years, they were beyond the national mean. So, I mean, in everything we've done, I think this is the only thing that I have from the sociology part of my studies. I'm not a researcher, but I value having scientific evidence behind anything we do. And then we adapted it for emergencies, for migrant displaced, chilly displaced by armed conflict in Colombia. I'll go very fast. We did many changes. We called it Escuela Nueva learning circles, and we had community tutors in the schools, in the communities, in community settings, not in schools, to help these children that come with the scars of war to enter the mainstream, to enter a conventional school. And the results, in less than 1 year, they were beyond the national mean. So you have human development. You are developing social capital of a country, the human capital, which is the most important thing. So this for us was key. We adapted from Chile a self-esteem test, and immediately these children, their self-esteem was improved. So there are high impact in various dimensions. In academic achievements, we reduce dropout rates, repetition, better academic achievements. In social skills, which are the soft skills, they're not so soft, they're the key. Self-esteem, peaceful interaction, democratic behavior, and better team players. And of course, handling diversity. This is the most important. This has a tremendous impact on community, reducing violence in families. We won one of the awards in the World Innovation Summit on Education in Qatar. We were one of the awardees in the category of handling diversity and pluralism in the classroom. So let's say we've adapted it to many countries in Latin America. Brazil, it's called Escola Activa. In Guatemala, in Panama, in Chile, El Salvador, it's got different names. We started a little bit in Uganda. I was just sharing my table some of the difficulties of getting started with governments in Africa. The Philippines also were difficult, but at the moment, we're also working with the Vietnamese government because we have our strategy of how to spread out, even though we're a tiny Colombian NGO. So at this moment, it's been adapted to 16 countries. We have projects in Timor-Leste. They came because they're one of the youngest countries, and they want to learn how to build citizenship. This is important. And of course, the Vietnamese. So we have had more like 35 countries visiting, or almost 40 right now. So the World Bank selected it as one of the outstanding reforms that had impacted national policies, and the United Nations Development Human Report of Colombia, and of course national planning offices, when they compared children of socioeconomic level 1, which are the poorest of the poor, they outbeat those of socioeconomic level 2. So in a way, this compensates for inequality and difficulties. USAID, girls outperform their male classmates, even in indigenous areas, where female access is historically low. And of course, the University of London showing that it is important, and we have results in the formation of democratic and peaceful social interaction. So this is interesting because we spread out mainly through governments. But then we had to create an institution to sustain all these things, because innovations fade within bureaucracies. So our main source of funds, we've never had donations, never have done really fundraising. I'm going to learn how to do a little bit of fundraising. We really have a small budget. It used to be 3 million, now it's 2 million. But in a way, we have learned to work with governments and spread out. And we were just talking with my colleagues from Ashoka what it means to spread out. So let's say we have received some recognitions. The first Clinton Global Citizen Award, it was important recognition. Of course, I'm an Ashoka, Skoll, and Schwab Fellow. The World Technology Award here in San Francisco in the area of social entrepreneurship. And we received the WISE Award. Now I have to put the Kravis Award, which is very important. But what is important is these recognitions start opening the doors of the private sector. And this is the first time that we're starting to work with private sector. I was saying we have learned that you need governments to having big impact and coverage and to work with the money of others. But then I had to create an institution to sustain. So you need civil society and private sector for quality and sustainability. So you have to work with the three: public, private, and civil society. This is we want to contribute. We're not going to take over the government responsibility. We have 4 major programs: rural Colombia, Colombia urban, emergencies, international. We want to have a learning network, and here's where I'm starting to need good backbones of institutes of leadership skills, like the ones you're leading, because we need that. So we're starting to see what this means worldwide. Our products are, we basically give technical assistance to countries. We want to build capacity in each country in all these areas, but then we also have to work with the private sector so that they can help us maintain quality and sustainability. And we have our products, our learning materials, and our teachers' manuals. I mean, we're thinking of possibly a certificate course for the future and an online community. We're starting to play with it. So these are some of our challenges. And we try to think of high-impact solutions that are scalable. We just started in the year 2009 a learning network. And I have to learn so much for my Ashoka colleagues we were talking with this morning, because I think there's so much to learn from all of you. We want to have a clear and ambitious vision. We want to be a recognized leading global player in basic education, and we want to be present in 3 continents, reaching additional 3 million children. At the moment, we've reached more than 5 million children in Latin America. Okay, this is what we want. We have a small, tiny office. At least at this moment, we have 30 employees. We used to have 3 million, now we have 2 million. But at least this is what we just did in Colombia in the last 3 years, so this was significant. And we want to start, we're growing. I was sharing some of this with some other colleagues. A majority of funds are from sale of products and services. We want to start having a sustainability fund. We're moving into that. But here's where I know Ernie's here. Where's Ernie? Yes. I'm going to be needing his solid advice, how to work towards this in the future. So I'm really interested to learn from all of you the best way of doing it. And this is our secret. It's just public-private partnerships, how to work with governments, how to work with businesses, how to work with civil society, with research, and especially leading universities. Amnesty International is here. We were selected as a human rights-based type of pedagogical model. If you don't learn participation in school, how do you want to talk about human rights? No. So we're working. We got the petroleum company involved, the Coffee Growers Federation in Colombia. I think we made their business better. This would be a great case study for a business school. At the moment, we are also being studied as a business example in Barcelona, and the YES School of Barcelona. When I started this, I didn't even know the word business model. I mean, these things I'm just trying to learn. My daughter, who came from the business school in Colombia, she said, "Mommy, don't give anything away so free." I gave it away free to all the countries. Get copyrights. So we got copyrights and we grew financially for 100%. But then everybody in the education sector in developing countries copies everything. So I got a professor visiting us. The Vietnamese, when they came last year, they brought 60 USB, 3 printing machines, everything, By the way, the people of the World Bank said, "Welcome to East Asia." So learn how does a small Colombian NGO work with the Vietnamese, and it's tough. So I'm also receiving suggestions that maybe we should start thinking of certifying in the future instead of selling our products and our technical assistance. So these were the things we were discussing in our table, how to spread out. We have a good solution. We have proven results. We want to work in Africa. We want to work in Asia. I'm actually financing someone in India to help us get started. The government of India has visited us twice. 10 years ago, 30 people came. 4 years ago, other 30 people came. But it's not easy to get started through governments. We have a whole strategy of how to get started, demand-driven, because we have to face that we work with countries where there are big unions. I'm actually right now writing an article for the Mexican Union, which is the largest union of the world. They're so interested in what we're doing. So, these are the issues. It's not only the innovation per se, it's how to introduce the innovation and have high impact. So this is the way we work, and I'm so eager to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. We'll be going around and basically taking any questions now.
Good afternoon. I was so happy to hear you talk. My name is Tom Lushai. I teach in the School of Educational Studies over here at Claremont Graduate University. I have been a big fan of yours since I first started graduate school about 10 years ago. And I have to tell you, whenever I talk in my classes about Escuela Nueva, I have to take off my objective researcher hat and say that you are my hero. I really appreciate all the fantastic work you've done. And I was born in Colombia, so that makes it even more special. But so welcome to Claremont. And I do have a question for you. I had the opportunity to work in Indonesia with some universities for about 4 years. And they trained hundreds of thousands of teachers there, practicing classroom teachers. And one of their biggest problems, they told me, was training their teachers in multi-grade, to teach in multi-grade classrooms. And so, of course, I told them all about Escuela Nueva, and I shared materials with them. I shared Angela Little's work with them. I showed them some videos that I had gotten from your website. And then they took me to see some of their schools, and they had enormous classrooms, 60, 70 students with third and fourth graders, or first, second, and third graders, and very little space, very few resources. And so my question is, in that kind of context, is it possible to implement the Escuela Nueva model when you don't really even have a lot of room to move around, to break kids into smaller groups? You only have one teacher, you have many, many children. So that's my question for you, and I would love to see Escuela Nueva in Indonesia, because there's certainly interest, but I'm just not sure if that's possible given the physical constraints.
Should I take the questions and then answer them, or should I respond immediately? Respond immediately, okay. Well, thank you so very much for your comments. I think, yes, we've done it also in the urban schools of Colombia. The best school of Medellin is a big school. It's a big school, and they've had the best results in achievement. Yes, you can do it, because it's basically having more small group work. But if you don't have space, like I'm seeing in India right now, I'm in Hyderabad trying out some things. It's tough. It's tough when the space is so limited and there's so many children. But when you have we have a couple of little secrets. We had to outbeat the system. As a sociologist, you have to see how you have to outbeat the system. So one of the first things we had to do was our learning modules. They're like silent teachers with the intelligent questions, higher level thinking skills. They're dialoguing, reusable material. So our learning modules, children can sit together among themselves and work in pairs or in a very tiny group without flexibility. In an Indian school, you don't even have chairs or anything. They can sit on the floor. So it's even more flexible. So we've done it in the urban school. Yes, it can be done. But of course, there are also limitations. If your space is so limited, then you have to see how to work through this. But it's also that learning is not necessarily, it takes in a place. It's an activity. So this permits flexibility to see how the children can learn within the setting, in the classroom or out of the classroom. But it's mainly with their learning modules. And in this way, the teacher doesn't have to scream, quieting everybody down so that everybody can listen to what she's saying. So this strategy can handle bigger groups if you have these learning modules behind. Okay, but you have to have these instruments behind so that this can happen. If you don't have the instruments, the only thing you have is a teacher yelling and putting everybody to quiet down, and you're forced to give a conference type of orientation. Okay. So it can be done, but of course there are some physical limitations that we have to also analyze. But in the urban settings, we did it. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. You mentioned how your curriculum emphasizes leadership skills for the children, but I wondered, could you clarify how leadership is emphasized on the part of the teacher as a facilitator, and how teaching is essentially leadership? Yeah,
the leadership skills are not taught as a content. It's the pedagogical process. So the pedagogical process is, since children are the ones that start, they're child-centered learning, which is really not the teacher speaking all the time. The children are actively engaged. So you see two little children working together, as I showed you with some of the pictures, or a small group, 3 or 4 children with their learning dialogues, with their learning modules, dialoguing. So they're forced to reach agreements. They're forced to dialogue among themselves. They're forced to accept the other person if he's not agreeing with you, but not using force. So you develop tolerance, you develop accepting different opinions in the small group. So the cooperative learning, which is not new, Johnson & Johnson here in the States, they've done so much research in Slavin on cooperative learning. This is proven. So they start developing these skills. And in addition to that, we have the school government, which is a space where children have their own committees. They elect their president, their vice president, their treasurer. They have committees, so they're forced to take initiative. Children are empowered. So we're actually creating a school of leaders. So this is why the leadership skills are not so much as a content, it's more the participatory methodology. Children take over. So this is I really would love to invite you to come to see these schools, which are not, they're not spectacular things, just to see that it can be done in a public low-income school. So I hope I responded to your answer. And by the way, this is when girls start popping out so much, because you change the relationships. It becomes a symmetrical relationship, no?
I just want to say thank you so much for coming here. I really enjoy listening to you speak. When I was in Cambodia this summer, I worked closely with a school in a rural community, and they were still dealing with the after effects of the Khmer Rouge. And my question was, what do you do in countries where the government has broken down so much that there's so much corruption that implementing an educational framework like this would be really difficult if you're starting from top down? So in terms of working with governments that are not really functioning correctly or efficiently, how do you do that so that you can operate in these rural or urban communities?
Oh yeah, I mean, what we learned is that you cannot work only with the government. You need the government for big impact, but innovations fade within the government. And the worst thing that happens worldwide is the turnover of teachers. So when you have trained the teachers, you have done the best you can, they're motivated, they're making changes, they're transferred. And usually with low-income schools, teachers want to be closer to the town, so everybody wants to be transferred. So it's a turnover is the worst thing. But of course, it's not only working with the governments. Here's where for example, in Mexico right now, I want to bring in the private sector, TV Azteca, to be my partner, because it's very difficult to work through the government. In India, I've received 60 Indians coming to Colombia from the government. So what? It's so difficult to get started because they're changing permanently. Not only teachers, but government officials. So I'm looking for a private sector organization to start learning how to make partners with them. So, but these are the challenges now from the business perspective, the business model. How do you partner? How do you do this? But definitely we want to have a bottom-up process. What I have learned is you have to have something to show. In education, things are so complex that you have to see them. You have to have visual images. And if you want to change attitudes and behaviors, which at the end that's what you work with in education, if you want to change the attitudes of the teachers, you have to take them to see, and so that they can say, we can do it. So this is more, let's say it's a transformational pedagogic in your classroom. Any teacher can do it. You don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to change the whole structure. I think one of the big problems in Latin America is that most of our educational reforms are administrative in nature. Everybody's just learning how to decentralize, who's going to handle the money, who's not going to steal the money, how can we, all these things. So the issue here is very simple, pragmatic things in the classroom, so you can transform your classroom. And what I'm trying to write for the Union of Mexico is saying, the teachers can do it. The agents of change are the children, the teachers, and the communities themselves. They are the actors of change. Change does not take place in the Ministry of Education. So it's the bottom-up process that you need. But of course, corruption is everywhere. And the more decentralized you are, the more veins for corruption that could come down. This is what Colombia is facing. Colombia and Brazil are the two more decentralized countries of Latin America. So it really hurts to see how the money goes. But with so little, you can transform things. Mikato? Yes. Takato?
Thank you so much for coming. You spoke about the challenges of parents in low-income families in getting involved in their children's education. And I was wondering, how did you encourage the parents to get involved?
Anything in our learning guides, our learning modules, which are let's say, let me start. Some of these equilibriums we find in education is that teacher training goes in one direction with a lot of money, no results. Textbooks go in another direction with a lot of investment, no results. methodologies go in another direction. So we actually packed everything together. One thing we know is that when teachers are training using their learning materials, that works. That's one of the variables that we know works. So we packed it all together. And our learning guides are teachers do not have time to plan every day a wonderful lesson plan, nor for a low-income school, nor for an elite school. You can't be creative every day. But you know that some classes work very well. But the question is, if you have this, how can you have 30,000 more do it? Not just in one school. So our learning guides systematize the learning process with the intelligent questions where children learn to analyze, dialogue, reach higher level thinking skills. And at the end, apply their knowledge with their parents. So they're forced to dialogue every day with their parents in some way. I ask my mother that she tells me what was the best joke she learned when she was a little girl. I write it down on a little paper and I bring it to the corner of Spanish or to the language corner. Very simple ways of promoting interaction, daily interaction. So our learning materials are sort of intergenerational and they promote dialogue between the children themselves, the children and the teachers, the children and the parents, the children and the community. We go visit our local mayor and ask him where is the most erosion part of our community. We write it, things like this. So children become agents of change with their parents and this. So it's just very practical, but we designed this. That teachers can adapt and make changes. But the big problem is teachers do not have time to plan every day a wonderful class, and in a multi-grade setting, less. You have to be a magician to do it. This is where we help the teacher a lot with the organization and the systematization of the lesson plan.
So unfortunately, we have time for only one last question. Is there a student then?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for coming and to be back at the Athenaeum. One of the things that I've worked on a lot in the past year at Ashoka has been looking at social entrepreneurs and listening to their life history. And because the most successful entrepreneurs I've found have some really very, very important experiences in their lives, and they've developed a trajectory to create their social innovation. And I was really very curious to hear what a little bit about you and how you arrived at Escuela Nueva, and what were the experiences that helped you to create this social innovation?
I guess three things. Well, one, as a sociologist, I'm convinced that there's no development and no peace in development if there's no quality basic education. That's the first premise. And as a sociologist, or you become a revolutionary and you want to change the whole structure, or you do a silent revolution through education. So that was one. The second thing is I myself was exposed, I had the opportunity of having good quality education. So when I came back, I went to see the schools. When I was visiting the remote rural schools in Colombia, no smiles in the classroom. So how can learning take place if children do not smile? So something was wrong. Something was wrong in that essential relationship. That was the first thing. A second issue. And I think the third issue is not start from scratch. You have to build on what exists. Somebody that co-authored with me the model was a rural Colombian teacher, a great teacher that was doing a great teacher. He was doing wonderful things in the classroom. But of course, it was only in his classroom. So I was thinking, how can we do it in 30,000? No? So then we had to think of in a more systemic way and how to introduce change. And the fourth thing, which I think is so important, is to introduce change within bureaucracies and make change happen. It's not only the innovation, it's the strategies of, not only the paradigm shift, the innovation that we know social entrepreneurs are doing, but also how to introduce strategies that make this feasible. So this was the other way. We had to start with a bottom-up approach and generate a demand-driven approach from the teachers themselves, because we work with unions, and anything that becomes imposed is immediately rejected. So these are the issues we have to tackle with. It's not only how to make quality education in the classroom. These things can be done, but it's how can you do it in 30,000? How can you replicate processes, not only content? with new technologies now, there's a big temptation with our online community. Let's say in our teacher training, we had such simple principles, but one was not to leave the teachers alone. So we had to create learning circles of teachers, what we call micro centers, that they would get together once a month or at least. And now with new technologies, I think we can do wonders.
Thank you very much for giving us this lesson in education and how to build a community of educated children that become the community of leaders of the future. Join me in thanking Vicky for being here and for being an extraordinary example of leadership.